I want to make my bias very clear. My favourite Deltarune character is Shorm. They have an air of mystery about them, a type of character who attracts theories and speculation like a magnet. In Chapter 1, they make it very clear. They want no part in your quest. They tell you about the Four Kings and the Knight's Conquest, but they also show no interest and claim that it's all irrelevant. But once you defeat Jevil and start the secret boss storyline, an entirely new side of Shorm is revealed, and the knowledge they hold becomes more suspicious. Suddenly, they become invested in the plot, and promise a reward for collecting the shadow crystals. So is Shorm just a simple collector? Or are they planning to use those shadow crystals for greater ambitions? This is my analysis and interpretation of the Deltarune theory that Shorm will be a secret boss in a future chapter of Deltarune. Shorm is a darkness of mystery, and the fan theory that I propose today will suggest an interesting solution to the riddles that they present. The idea is simple. This cat has an ulterior motive, and Toby is setting up a greater plotline with the secret bosses that will culminate with Shorm being our final secret boss in Chapter 7. Although I also understand that this theory is a bit out of left field. We already have 2 secret bosses so far, and predicting the Chapter 3 boss is hard enough. The Chapter 7 boss should surely be impossible, right? In this video, I'm going to showcase this theory, properly break down the evidence that points towards this character having greater relevance, to paint the picture of a hypothetical Shorm boss fight. So let's start with the evidence. Part 1. Appearance. One of the key parts of a secret boss is the basic overall appearance and character. Both Jevil and Spamton are items that became abandoned or discarded by humans. Jevil is a playing card, and Spamton is spam email malware. Shorm also fits this description. They are a teddy bear, well, a stuffed cat I guess, but it's basically the same thing. They are a very worn and stitched together plush toy, who clearly hasn't been played with in a very long time, and who makes constant references to their stitches and stuffing. As children grow older, you have to leave stuffed toys behind. It's a childhood toy that is commonly abandoned. This sure allows Shorm to fit alongside the abandonment trope that Jevil and Spamton have established. However, as a counter-argument, the entirety of the card kingdom is abandoned, including the other cards. The fact that Shorm is based on an abandoned item could just be a connection to the themes of the Dark World that they originate from. We need more concrete evidence. Part 2. Forbidden Knowledge. All 2 secret bosses so far have a unique relationship to the concept of freedom, an idea that will probably become one of the game's main themes, if it isn't already. Just like how Jevil has created a positive acceptance, embracing his lack of freedom by flipping it on his head, and how Spamton is aware of his lack of freedom by becoming determined to prove himself, Shorm has also become heavily jaded and nihilistic when it comes to freedom. Some of what Shorm says is similar to Jevil's perspective. For example, they call the rest of the Card Kingdom mad, whilst they imply that they see themselves as sane. They also describe the Dark World as a prison, almost directly quoting Jevil's philosophy. Although some of their perspective seems unique, and is different to what Jevil thinks. For starters, they are one of the few characters who not only mention the prophecy, but actively deny it, calling us heroes in quotes, and saying that neither light nor dark hold a future for a darkner in their condition. And also, just to be clear, the prophecy appears to be common knowledge amongst most darkners, even if it's not directly mentioned. It's implied constantly, and Lancer directly states that he's the tear-headed darkner who's shown in the prophecy's sprites. However, what's interesting with Shorm is they've been able to reject the prophecy. That's something that normal darkness have struggled with, their own supposed inferiority, and the role they have to play in this legend. Ralsei's character arc is built upon this idea, and it's a concept that Shorm is flat out rejecting. They do not see themselves as part of the story, they see themselves as an observer. This perspective does not change in Chapter 1, until after the Jevil boss fight, where they give us a toast to the end of the world. But it's important to note that although they do take interest in the plot after Jevil, and they start to see us as heroes, that doesn't fully erase their pessimism, and they stand firm in their belief that we will one day realise the futility of our actions. Another key part of Shorm's forbidden knowledge, they know what a shadow crystal is. In fact, they act surprised when we show them the first shadow crystal at the start of Chapter 2, because they weren't aware that Jevil had one, and they explain to us the large amount of power that they contain. Now this presents a really obvious question. If Shorm knows about the shadow crystals, yet they didn't know that Jevil had one, how do they gain the knowledge of the crystals? Something else that's interesting is they seemingly know that we will collect more shadow crystals, and they also know the secret bosses that are coming in the future. For example, they know exactly who Spamton is and what power the Neo body holds. Now in game, It's made clear that different characters from different Dark Worlds have interacted in the past. We know both Jevil and Spamton, and King and Queen have had relationships in the past amongst other characters. We don't know how these characters travel to different Dark Worlds, but we can just accept this as the game's background. However, the body in the basement is implied to be a very closely kept secret across all Dark Worlds. Swatch created it as the embodiment of a lightner's dream, and Spamton found it in the basement and started praying to it before he was kicked out. Now we get no concrete answer as to why Spamton knows that this body exists, but it's safe to assume he either found out about it through Swatch or the mystery man on the phone. But you know who shouldn't know about the body? Shorm. When asked, they immediately know what the body is and how it was created. And not only that, they also know who the Chapter 3 secret boss is, and how we could combat them. In fact, their knowledge around the Shadow Mantle is a theory that I've discussed before. Now, my theory is one of the powers that our mystery secret boss man over here is granted these darkness is the foresight to see the future and the past. And this is evidenced in the dialogue of the secret boss characters that we already have. The evidence for the boss of seeing the future is pretty obvious, since that's like half of Jevil's dialogue. But the ability to see the past is also hinted at through Spamton, since he knows about Jevil's condition. We know the Card Kingdom was cut off from the Light World a long time ago. So if we assume that the Jevil backstory happened after the Card Kingdom was abandoned, Spamton shouldn't know about Jevil going insane and getting locked up. But Spamton knows about Jevil's imprisonment anyway. He states that he wants to surpass that clown around town and shoot for the sky, aka Spamton isn't content with just accepting freedom like Jevil does. He wants to actively gain true freedom. But also, he's seen Jevil's imprisonment, something he probably shouldn't know without outside assistance. So, if you're following along with me here, both Jevil and Spamton have an awareness of future and past events, and a similar awareness is also illustrated through Shorm's dialogue. So I feel comfortable with theorising that Shorm either has a Shadow Crystal, or at minimum they may have a similar knowledge set to what the Shadow Crystals give the secret bosses. This isn't a massive leap in logic, in fact it's probably the best explanation we have so far to explain why Shorm knows so much. Part 3. The character shift. This segment is influenced by the previous one, the knowledge that Shorm has of the Shadow Crystals. Personally, I like to call the act of encountering the secret bosses the Secret Boss questline. This isn't an official name, but I call it this intentionally, because the act of collecting Shadow Crystals is directly tied to Shorm's role in the story. In a normal non-secret boss playthrough, Shorm knows that they won't be of use to you once you continue in your adventure. Their wares will become outdated as you progress. This is spelled out in Shorm's normal story dialogue in Chapter 2, so basically the nihilism that defined them in Chapter 1 continues here. But if you actively go out of your way to do the secret boss questline, they start to get invested. This change in character seems to happen when we finally defeat Jevil, and Shorm recognises us as the heroes of legend. From then on, they seem genuinely invested in our journey, and they start to give us advice, mainly hinting at a reward for collecting more Shadow Crystals. But they also attempt to give us the Shadow Mantle before they realise it's been stolen, showing that they want us to continue our adventure and have a fighting chance against the Chapter 3 secret boss. At first glance, Shorm has no motivation for this change in character, unless they have something to gain from the pursuit of Shadow Crystals. It is really curious how Shorm has this character change, and I think this can be easily used to craft a motive for why Shorm would become a secret boss. If they have gained the levels of awareness that the secret bosses have, they will clearly know the power that these crystals hold. Just look at the power boost that Spamton got when he went into the Neo body, something he knew about beforehand. Now imagine if someone had multiple crystals at once to amplify that power. So when our party comes along and presents Shorm with a way to collect more crystals, they could have happily jumped at that possibility. The opportunity to gain our trust and collect something that can make them truly powerful, so they can gain the power and the worldview that they could have had if they stuck alongside Jevil back in the day, now amplified tenfold. Although that's just how I see it. I think that's my best guess as to what Shorm's motivation could be. Oh, and before I forget, I left the best part for last. Part 4. The Seam Ripper. Easily one of the biggest pieces of evidence that leans towards Shorm having a boss fight is found in the Undertale cross-stitching book of all places. Okay, so quick disclaimer, Toby has gone on record saying that merchandise isn't canon. This little blurb I'm about to tell you isn't definitive proof that Shorm had or will use a weapon. However, Deltarune merchandise has foreshadowed the game before. The Spamton Sweepstakes is an example of this, with multiple references to what might be coming next in the game's future. But the most obvious bit of merch foreshadowing is this sticker released in the Chapter 1 merchandise line that shows a traumatised Noelle saying, "This isn't you." This had no context when we only had Chapter 1, but looking back, it's almost undeniably a reference to the Snowgrave route, created 2 years before Chapter 2 dropped. So if we assume that merch can foreshadow, and we look in the Undertale cross-stitching book, we find this interesting item description. The Seam Ripper, a tool designed to allow for the easy removal of stitches. Its small curved blade cuts through the thread, whilst its blunt or bore top point protects your fabric. Essential for ripping out a misaligned stitch if you're too far along to simply rip the thread out. Once wielded by Shorm in combat. Once again, the merch isn't can disclaimer needs to go in full swing here, but let's be honest, this can't be ignored. This feels like a deliberate piece of world building. Shorm already had an implied past of combat. They were the court magician who trapped Jevil within their prison. It definitely adds to the theory if we know that Shorm could be hiding their combat experience from us. Also, the line about pulling out the misaligned thread once he's too far gone is really interesting. I've seen the idea floated before that this could be foreshadowing for a Snowgrave Shorm fight, with Shorm filling in the role that Sans held in Undertale Genocide. It's definitely an interesting option to consider when you realise that the Pure Crystal exists, an unused item in the game files that's said to be purified by the cat, that will probably be used by Malleus to create the Twisted Sword in the Snowgrave route. Okay, so hear me out. If Shorm is trying to collect Shadow Crystals, what would they drop when their secret boss is defeated? I think the item that Shorm could be whipping up for us is the Pure Crystal, and they're not actually making it for us, they're making it for themselves. It's something that they would want in order to become a secret boss that's more powerful than all others. But once we defeat them, instead of a normal Shadow Crystal, what if they drop a Pure Crystal instead? A unique item that's only obtainable after fighting every secret boss definitely feels like a worthy reward. Okay, now we're getting to the home stretch, so here are a few miscellaneous points to make this theory properly complete. Only eyes blinded by darkness can see the way. This riddle is presented to us at the very start of Chapter 1, once Chris falls into the Dark World. In this puzzle, you have to blind the eyes that are carved into the Closet Dark World's mysterious landscape in order to reveal the path ahead. This line has been used by many theorists that suggest that it can be applied to key characters like King, Queen, Spamton and Jevil, who have darkened, covered or fully blinded eyes, yet have been able to see a path going forward in different ways. And hey, guess who has one blind squinting eye that looks surprisingly similar to the one carved into the rock? So now, after all that, it's time for my final thoughts. So what do I think about this theory? Well, personally, I love it. I think the biggest downside is that Shorm's motive with them needing to power themselves up with a Pure Crystal is a bit shaky. The best way to describe this theory is to say, the pieces will fall in place over time. As the Secret Boss questline continues, we can truly solidify how this theory will play out. I think the best explanation right now is the idea that Shorm is intentionally getting us to encounter more and more secret bosses for a purpose. A shopkeeper offering us the ultimate barter, offering freedom for a price. Thank you for watching.